On the day of the engagement, the fiancé fell deeply in love with his younger sister at first sight and insisted on marrying her instead. However, he did not know that the younger sister had already fallen in love with someone else and had secretly pledged their lives to each other. The younger sister threatened to kill herself and asked me to help her fake her death so she could escape and be with her true love. Later, when the fiancé had risen to a high position in the court, the younger sister suddenly reappeared and forced me to abdicate. She accused me of being jealous and plotting to ruin her life. I only then realized that she had regretted her decision to fake her death and leave the mansion, and had hated me ever since. I was beaten to a pulp and tortured to death. After being reborn, I watched my legitimate younger sister crying and begging me to grant her wish. I smiled and sent her off in her wedding palanquin. Chapter 1. Legitimate sister. I already have someone I love. I will never marry Gusheng. I suddenly opened my eyes to see Xiaowanyu, dressed as a young girl, lying on the bed, wailing loudly. The maid outside the door knocked urgently on the door to remind me. Miss, the master has sent someone to urge you 4 times. Mr. Gu is insisting on staying in the front hall and refuses to leave, saying that he must have the second Mrs. consent for this marriage. As the maid's urgent prompts echoed, beads of sweat the size of beans trickled down my forehead. Despite the sweltering summer heat, an icy chill crept up my spine. The pain from the needles piercing my body had not subsided, and my internal organs felt as though they were being twisted and torn apart. Each breath felt like a needle pricking my skin. I rolled up my sleeves, only to find my arms smooth as ever, with no trace of needle marks or injuries. In an instant, I understood the situation before me. I had been reborn on the day Gusheng proposed to Xiaowanyu. In my previous life, Gusheng fell deeply in love with Xiaowanyu at first sight on the day of the betrothal and insisted on marrying her. To be with her beloved, she threatened to kill herself and asked me to help her fake her death so she could escape and be with her lover. However, when Gusheng had risen to a high position in the court, she suddenly appeared and accused me of being jealous and plotting to kill her. I was beaten with a whip made of 1,000 needles. Struck 460 times, leaving my body a pulp of blood and flesh, and I died in despair. Now that I have been reborn, how can I repeat the same mistake? Xiaowanyu stood with her back to me, unaware of my unusual behavior. After crying her heart out, she struggled to sit up on the bed, clutching my hand and pleading, "Eldest sister, if mother were still alive, she would never have allowed me to marry Gusheng." I lowered my eyes to the jade pendant around her neck. It was the keepsake my mother had left her. I had once sworn an oath before that jade pendant to care for Xiaowanyu for the rest of her life. The household was in turmoil. My father favored his concubine and mistreated my mother, despising her for coming from a merchant family, yet he coveted her enormous dowry and deceived her into marrying him. The concubine was determined to replace my mother as the legitimate wife and poisoned the labor-inducing medicine my mother was taking. At the time, I was only 3 years old, clinging to my mother's bedside, crying until I was hoarse, with my hands stained with the blood from her difficult childbirth. My mother struggled to place her cherished jade pendant into my hands and entrusted me with her final words. "An older sister is like a mother. After I die, you will be your younger sister's closest relative. After I die, you must take your younger sister back from the concubine's hands. Do not let her forget who her biological mother truly is. Do not let her be led down a path with no return." After my mother's death, although my father knew that my aunt had plotted her death, he turned a blind eye and buried her hastily. My newborn sister, Xiaowanyu, and I were also handed over to my aunt to raise. As I watched Xiaowanyu grow up, she came to regard her foster mother as her own and grew increasingly distant from me. The hatred in my heart grew like a snowball, rolling larger and larger. At the age of 13, I uncovered the truth behind my mother's death during childbirth and used our family's reputation to force my father to make a decision. Only then was my stepmother banished to the estate to live as a slave, never to return to the Xia family. Xia Wenyu finally learned the truth and recognized me as her legitimate older sister. From that day forward, we lived together in the Xia household, relying on one another for support. All the guilt and regret I had accumulated over the past 10 years were transformed into equal love, which I poured onto Xia Wenyu. But in this new life, I suddenly realized, Xia Wenyu does not deserve my love, nor does she deserve my mother's love. Since she was taken away by my stepmother and raised by her, the blood flowing through her veins is no longer my mother's. Through years of brainwashing, she has become my stepmother's daughter. She is as despicable and treacherous as her stepmother, and she hates me just as much. All her kindness and obedience were just a facade to trick me into sacrificing everything for her. I looked at Xia Wenyu and pulled my hand away from hers. I said, "Your elder sister is willing to help you. But before that, there are some hardships you must endure. Are you willing?" Xia Wenyu bit her lip, hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "As long as I can be with Lin Xi, I'm willing to do anything." I looked at her tear-streaked face and laughed even more wildly. The next moment, I picked up the porcelain bowl in my hand and smashed it on the ground. With lightning speed, I pressed Xia Wenyu's face into the shattered porcelain fragments on the ground. I shouted loudly, "Sister, how could you be so foolish? Even if you don't want to marry Gu Gongzi, you can't take your own life." Blood gushed out instantly. Xia Wenyu covered her face with her hands, curled up on the ground, and screamed hoarsely. By the time the maids heard the screams and rushed in from outside, I had already composed my expression. With a sorrowful expression, I embraced Xia Wenyu in my arms, tears streaming down my face, and pressed a handkerchief firmly against her wound. I said anxiously, "Quick! Call a doctor." Xia Wenyu, in excruciating pain and unconscious, clutched her face and screamed, "My face! My face hurts so much." I looked at the large and small bloody holes on her face caused by the ceramic shards and smiled. In my previous life, she had threatened to kill herself to force me to help her. In the struggle to save her, I was cut on the face by the hairpin she had used to try to kill herself. The deep scar, visible to the bone, extended from under her eye to her nose, and no ointment could erase it. I had become the laughingstock of the capital, ranked first among the ugliest women. Now, it was her turn. The news of Xia Wenyu's attempted suicide quickly reached the front hall. My father entered and flew into a rage, pointing at Xia Wenyu and shouting, "You worthless thing! It's your good fortune that Gu Gongzi even noticed you. What are you trying to achieve by acting like this?" Xia Wenyu immediately cried out in distress. "It was Xia Wenrong who ruined me." Upon hearing this, the air grew still for a moment. Everyone's gaze turned toward me in confusion. After my mother's death, my personality became increasingly erratic and unpredictable. After scheming to expel the concubine who had plotted to kill my mother from the mansion, my reputation grew increasingly ruthless, and no one dared to provoke me. Yet, despite my venomous heart, I pampered Xia Wenyu with indulgence, treating her like a precious treasure. No matter what, it couldn't possibly be me who did it. I took a handkerchief to cover my face and sobbed. How could my own sister say such a thing? From childhood onward, anything my younger sister desired, I would willingly give her. How could I possibly commit such a heinous act for a marriage alliance? If my younger sister did not wish to marry Mr. Gu, she could have simply refused. Why frame me for it? You have broken my heart. Xia Wenyu tried to say something else, but was interrupted by her father. Enough! You won't even cherish such a good marriage. You dare to slander your elder sister? It's all because I spoiled you too much. I immediately chimed in. Younger sister, stop being so stubborn. This is a good marriage for you and for our entire family. When I mentioned the words good marriage, I emphasized them deliberately. Xiaowan immediately grew anxious. Her heart and mind were consumed by her beloved, and she longed to be the talented scholar and beautiful maiden in a storybook. She dreamed of the scholar passing the imperial examination with flying colors and marrying her as the wife of a top-ranking official. She couldn't bear to hear that she was to be married to someone else. She jumped off the bed and rushed toward the door. What a good match! I'm going out to chase that goof family away. I watched her calmly as she passed by me. Just as she was about to brush past me, I raised my hand and slapped her. It's because your father and I spoiled you so much that you've become so arrogant. You're putting our entire family at risk for your own selfish desires. Marriage is arranged by parents and matchmakers. As an unmarried daughter, how dare you interfere and call off the engagement? If word of this breaks out today, how will your father and brother face their colleagues in the government? How will I ever show my face again? Her face was already injured. And when I struck her suddenly, the wounds that had been bandaged opened, oozing fresh blood. She rolled on the ground, looking disheveled and pitiful. She screamed shrilly, covering her face and glaring at me, shouting, "Xia Wanrong, you've gone mad. How dare you hit me?" I lowered my face, took a handkerchief from nearby, and wiped my hands carefully before saying, "Disciplining my younger sister is my duty as the eldest sister. Before your wedding, you must stay in your room and not go anywhere. Take good care of your injuries so that Mr. Gu doesn't send you back after the wedding, bringing shame to the Xia family. I will accompany father to the front hall to apologize to Mr. Gu." On the way back to the front hall, my father's gaze toward me was dark and ambiguous. After a long while, he finally reached out and patted my shoulder twice. "Wanrong, at least you're sensible." I nodded indifferently, uttering a soft in response. Ever since the truth about my mother's death came to light, I had been protecting Xiaowan and opposing my father at every turn. Our relationship had grown cold. Now, I had suddenly sided with him, prioritizing family interests and speaking harshly to Xiaowan. He naturally assumed that I had suddenly come to my senses and understood filial piety. Unfortunately, he doesn't know that in this lifetime, I only want him and Xiaowan to die together. If it weren't for his favoritism toward his concubine and his mistreatment of his wife, my mother's revenge wouldn't have had to wait 10 years to be carried out. Now he's pretending to be a loving father for whom to see. Upon returning to the front hall, Gu Xing had been waiting for some time. He looked toward me with joy, but upon realizing it was me and not Xiaowan, his expression turned cold again, and he turned to his father to inquire about Xiaowan's well-being. His entire focus was on Xiaowan. From start to finish, he never once looked at me, his former fiancé. Not even a single word of apology. I remained indifferent, accustomed to his disregard. There had never been much emotion between Gu Xing and me, and even our arranged marriage was something I had deliberately orchestrated. It was all to leverage the Gu family's influence in the capital to avenge my mother, wipe out the Xie family, and secure my escape. Although the Xie family was not a prominent clan in the imperial court, my grandfather had once risked his life to protect the emperor during a military campaign, earning him a noble title from the previous emperor. My father, upon entering the imperial court, had always served diligently and cautiously, leaving no room for criticism. To seek revenge, I had no choice but to use others to force the Xie family into a corner, pushing them to the brink of destruction. Gu Xing was the perfect tool I had chosen. Gu Xing's grandfather was a veteran statesman of 2 dynasties, and Gu Xing himself was a prodigiously talented young man, widely recognized as the pride of the capital. By aligning with him, the downfall of the Xie family was inevitable, but I never anticipated that he would fall in love with Xiaowan, and Xiaowan became the sole variable in my entire plan. It also revealed Gu Xing's true nature to me. He was not someone worthy of my trust or collaboration. Even without Xia Wanyu's existence, he would still have sent me to my death. I still clearly remember the words Gu Xing said to me in my final moments. His expression was cold and indifferent as he stepped on my cheek with disdain, sneering. I had intended to spare you out of old affection and grant you a swift death after the third prince ascends the throne. But since you dared to frame Wanyu, don't blame me for being ruthless. With each word, the pressure on my face grew stronger. By the time he finished speaking, all my teeth had shattered in my mouth, and the blood mixed with the broken teeth flowed down my throat, causing unbearable pain. Even now, thinking back on it, my mouth still throbs with pain. A knife that isn't firmly grasped in one's hand will only end up hurting oneself. Gu Xing must be eliminated sooner rather than later. As Gu Xing was about to board the carriage leaving the mansion, I sent a servant to block him. Gu Xing stopped impatiently, looked down at me arrogantly, and said, "Xia Wanrong, our partnership will not be affected by the cancellation of the engagement. I will help you kill the entire Xia family, and you must keep your promise to hand over all the inheritance your mother left you to the third prince to help him ascend the throne." I shook my head, squeezed a few tears from my eyes, and took out a stack of silver notes, holding them up to Gu Xing and said softly, "No. I just have something to entrust to you. Wanyua lost her mother at a young age and has been relying on me for survival in the mansion. She has been mistreated by her stepmother and has always been meek and cautious. This is all the savings I have accumulated. Now that our relationship is complicated, many in the capital have reservations about Wanyu. Please speak well of her in the capital and dispel the rumors. Let her marry in glory on that day and not be criticized by others." Gu Xing raised his eyebrows at me, put away the silver notes, and smiled smugly. This young master will not disappoint Miss Ye's entrustment. Within 3 days, everyone in the capital will know about my marriage to Wanyu. I will make Wanyu the most proud and glorious bride in the entire capital. After Gu Xing left, I put on my veil again and stepped out into the alley. I took out the silver coins I had prepared earlier from my sleeve and tossed them to the beggars in the alley. A cruel smile appeared on my lips. "I want you to do 2 things. Compose a nursery rhyme about Miss Xia and the scholar's secret affair and sing it throughout the entire capital. On the day of Miss Xia's wedding, sing it around her wedding palanquin while laughing and mocking her, to enrage Gu Xing." Soon, 2 rumors began to circulate in the capital. The first was spread by Gu Xing, claiming that he had originally sought to marry Xia, not Xia Jia's eldest daughter. He and Xia were a match made in heaven, having met at a poetry gathering where they fell in love through their poetry. Through a series of chance encounters, their feelings for each other grew deep. He swore to the heavens that he would marry no one but Xia. Such a divine couple left many unmarried women in the capital envious. The second rumor was spread by me. It claimed that Gu Xing was a shameless villain who had set his sights on the second daughter of the Xia family despite her already being engaged. He even went so far as to threaten the life of the second young lady's beloved to force her to marry him. Such a man of talent but no virtue is unworthy of marrying the second young lady of the Xia family and would tarnish the family's reputation. The 2 completely different rumors spread like wildfire, causing a stir throughout the capital. Everyone was curious about the past entanglements between the 2 of them. For a time, their names were on everyone's lips in the streets and alleys. Some even went so far as to say that they would overturn the wedding palanquin on the day of Xia Wanyu and Gu Cheng's wedding. They wanted to see whether Xia Wanyu was marrying of her own free will or being forced into it. To verify the truth of the rumors, a gambling house was even set up in the capital. However, most people believed that Xia Wanyu was being forced into marriage. For a time, the odds on the true love rumor remained high. Gu Xing was furious and tried repeatedly to find the source of the rumors. However, there were many beggars in the capital, and their movements were unpredictable. The information they passed on was a mix of truth and lies, and no one could say for certain who had started the rumors. After several searches, Gu Xing could only give up. Over time, he began to harbor doubts, suspecting that Xia Wenyu had secretly pledged her life to someone else. He visited her multiple times, hoping to uncover the truth. However, both I and my father smiled and brushed him off. My father valued his own future above all else. He would never give up the opportunity to climb the Gu family's social ladder by marrying into them, forcing Gu Xing to break off the engagement. As for the rumors, he firmly believed that the Gu family would step in to resolve the matter. After sending Gu Xing away, I went to see Xia Wenyu. After dismissing all the maids and servants, I slowly entered the room. Xia Wenyu lay weakly on the bed. Upon seeing me, she immediately sat up angrily, grabbed the medicine bowl beside her, and threw it at me. Xia Wenrong, you have the nerve to show your face here? I looked straight into Xia Wenyu's furious eyes. Her face, tightly wrapped in bandages, revealed two bloodshot eyes filled with resentment. I smiled slightly, pulled a letter from my bosom, and handed it to Xia Wenyu. If I didn't do this, how could I help you fake your death and escape, so you could be with your beloved? On the day of your wedding to Gu Cheng, I will arrange for someone to stir up a commotion. You will escape in the chaos, and Lin Ci will be waiting for you by the river. Xia Wenyu's eyes lit up, and she grabbed the letter in my hand as if it were a lifeline. I continued to smile faintly. This was Lin Ci's idea. Only by disfiguring you now, so that no one can recognize your face, can we find a fake corpse to pass off as you on your wedding day. Upon hearing Lin Ci's name, Xia Wenyu's eyes immediately filled with shame. But soon, she grabbed my hand in terror and murmured, "Eldest sister, but what about my face? I can't become the wife of the top scholar with this face. Eldest sister, please think of a way." I gently patted her hand, took out a bottle of ointment, placed it in her palm, and comforted her. Your elder sister has already thought of everything. This ointment was obtained from a renowned physician. As long as you apply it to your face daily, the scars will disappear within half a month. Xia Wenyu's eyes lit up with joy, and she immediately grabbed the ointment into her palm. Watching Xia Wenyu's joyful expression, I struggled to suppress the smile at the corner of my mouth. Xia Wenyu, you fool. How could I be so kind to her? That was a poison I had specially commissioned someone to concoct. While the scars on her face would indeed fade with use of the ointment, but as soon as she stops using it, her face will immediately break out in pus-filled sores, growing worse each day until her skin rots and maggots crawl out. It will then spread throughout her body, turning her into a pile of rotting flesh, slowly and hopelessly, just like the 460 needles that Gu Xing had driven into me in our previous life. With Xia Wenyu's cooperation, everything was proceeding smoothly. On the day of Xia Wenyu's wedding, the scars on her face appeared to be fully healed, indistinguishable from her former beauty with skin as smooth as jade. But only I knew that beneath her skin, countless foul-smelling pus-filled sores were lurking, ready to erupt. Xia Wenyu held my hand, overjoyed. After today, I'll be as happy as the talented scholar and beautiful maiden in the storybook. Eldest sister, I don't know how to thank you enough. She smiled even more shyly, her expression touching to the heart. I smiled back, my eyes sparkling, glancing toward the wedding palanquin in the front yard. The show was about to begin. As the palanquin reached the halfway point, the beggars I had arranged for rushed into the wedding procession. Although the guards sent by the Gu family were numerous, they could not match the sheer number of beggars in the capital city. Before long, the ragged beggars surrounded the wedding palanquin, dancing and singing children's songs around it. Gu Xing, who was leading the procession, saw the flower-decked palanquin surrounded and immediately spurred his horse forward. His face was filled with anxiety as he shouted angrily, "Get out of the way! All of you! Get out of the way!" Anyone who touches the flower-decked palanquin will have their hands cut off. Anyone who touches the flower-decked palanquin with their feet will have their feet cut off. But soon, Gushing reined in his horse with a grim expression. For the nursery rhyme featuring Xiaowen Yu and Lin Xi had already reached his ears. The beggars surrounded Gushing, pointing at his red groom's robe and laughing so hard they could barely stand. Teasing him. The groom is picking up a beggar. The Gu family's young master is truly a kind-hearted person. Gushing was furious, snatched the sword from the guard's hand, and swung it toward the beggars. The beggars scattered in panic, and Gushing's sword struck the wedding palanquin directly in the center. His face turned pale, and he immediately dismounted, frantically lifting the palanquin. Wan Yue, are you okay? Gushing's anxious voice stopped abruptly. There was no trace of Xia Wanyue in the palanquin, only a red wedding dress left behind. Xia Wanyue had eloped. The young men from wealthy families who had accompanied Gushing to welcome his bride also rode up to Gushing and froze when they saw the wedding veil in his hand. The onlookers gathered outside the inn were also in an uproar. Soon, whispers began to spread. The second young miss of the Xie family must have been kidnapped by him. If they truly loved each other, why would she run away in broad daylight? How dare he? A son of a noble family. He's no better than an animal. Gushing stood in the wedding procession, his face as red as a pig's liver, his teeth clenched so tightly they ground together. Search! Dig the ground 3 feet deep and find her. Anyone who finds Xia Wenyu will be rewarded with 100 taels of silver. Bring her back alive or dead. I sat in the carriage, covering my mouth with a smile, and glanced at Xia Wanyue and Lin Xi, who were bound and gagged in the corner of the carriage. I whispered, "My dear sister, did you hear that?" Xia Wanyue was both shocked and terrified. She clung tightly to the corner, curling herself into a ball, her face twisted in anger. She screamed at me, "Xia Wanrong, you vile woman! How dare you go back on your word?" I grinned, holding the dagger and moving it closer to her face. I pressed the blade against her arm and said lightly, "How did I go back on my word? Didn't I help you escape? It was you and your lover who were useless. You couldn't even escape 3 miles before my men caught you and brought you back." Xia Wanyue suddenly burst into maniacal laughter, spitting venomously at me with eyes bulging. "Xia Wanrong, how can you do this to your mother's entrusted daughter? How can you murder your own flesh and blood sister like this? If our mother were to learn of this in the afterlife, she would surely regret not strangling you to death before she died, taking you with her." I found it laughable. She spoke so righteously. But did she ever think about the sisterly bond between us when she killed me in her previous life? Suddenly, a foul odor wafted through the carriage. I glanced over and saw Xia Wanrong's lover, Lin Xi, curled up in a ball. The fabric between his legs was soaked with an unknown liquid, leaving a dark stain. He had wet himself out of fear. When he saw me looking at him, Lin Xi grew even more terrified. He lowered his head, desperately trying to close his legs to cover himself, muttering, "Miss Xia, I was wrong. Please spare me." With tear-filled eyes, he foolishly crawled forward a few steps, pressing his face against my shoe and begging. I had no intentions toward the second young miss. All of this was her doing. She seduced me into doing it. She forced me. On the day of the Lantern Festival, she said I was handsome and ordered the maids to bring us together in secret. I was so blinded by desire. Xia Wanyu gaped in disbelief, staring at Lin Xi. Then she erupted in anger. "Everything was my fault? When you lured me to the temple for a secret meeting and seduced me into committing adultery in broad daylight, was that also my fault? I'm carrying your child in my womb. And when I said I'd do anything to run away with you, weren't you the happiest person alive?" Lin Xi jumped in surprise and immediately denied it. "If it weren't for you clinging to me so desperately, I wouldn't even look at you. I watched the two of them pointing fingers at each other and shouting angrily, a smile growing wider on my lips. No wonder Xiaowenyu regretted it after faking her death in the previous life. It turned out that the man she had once admired as a tall, handsome, and intelligent gentleman was actually a cowardly good-for-nothing. After they escaped by faking their deaths, they revealed their true colors. They heaped blame and contempt on Xiaowenyu, and the promise of making her the wife of a top scholar vanished without a trace. But so what? The path was her own choice. No matter how bitter or regretful her life becomes, she shouldn't trade my life for her own future. Xiaowenyu's lips twitched, and her eyes turned blood red. She suddenly lunged forward, tackling Lin Xi to the ground, and the two of them began to wrestle. I smiled as I used a dagger to slice each of them once, separating them. The blood-stained blade slapped against their terrified faces, exuding an eerie sense of decadence. Don't rush. Want to die? Take your time. One by one. Soon, the bodies of Xiaowenyu and Lin Xi were found at the bottom of the cliff. They had committed suicide by jumping off the cliff together. Even their bones were shattered into pieces the size of thumbnails, and their faces were torn to shreds by sharp rocks. Their hands were still intertwined, unable to be prized apart. At the same time, a blood-stained letter written by Lin Xi was found beside them. Every word was written in blood, recounting the tragic love story between him and Xiaowenyu. Their love story spread throughout the tea houses and brothels of the capital, leaving listeners heartbroken and in tears. Gu Sheng, having caused such a scandal, naturally became a pariah, despised by all. Even toddlers knew of his notoriety, cursing him as no better than a beast and even urinating at the gates of the Gu mansion. The reputation of the entire Gu clan was tarnished by his actions. Upon hearing of his son's deeds, Gu Sheng's father was overcome with rage, beating him 30 times with a rod and confining him to his home to reflect on his mistakes. No matter how they tried to make amends, the incident had grown too large and eventually reached the emperor's ears. The emperor flew into a rage. He deemed Gu Sheng a man of talent but no virtue, and no matter how the Gu family pleaded for mercy, the emperor's anger would not subside. An imperial edict was issued, ordering Gu Sheng to never set foot in the imperial court again. In his previous life, Gu Sheng had risen to the position of chancellor, second only to the emperor. Now he could never set foot in the bureaucracy again, which was indeed his just deserts. When the crown prince summoned me to the tea house to relay this news, I couldn't help but sigh in dissatisfaction. This punishment was still too lenient. 2 lives were traded for 30 lashes and a ban on holding official office. Even if he couldn't hold office, he still had the Gu family to support him. Over time, once everyone has forgotten about this matter, he will inevitably find other opportunities to make a comeback. In his previous life, he had already plotted for the 3rd prince to seize the throne that rightfully belonged to the crown prince. He rose to become a new powerhouse in the court. In this life, he has already secretly allied himself with the 3rd prince. His comeback is merely a matter of time. To ensure that Gu Sheng is forever damned and unable to rise again, more effort is needed. As I pondered this, the pastry in my hand fell to the ground. Looking at the crumbs on the floor, I frowned in annoyance and kicked the figure kneeling on the ground. Get over here and lick it clean. The figure on the ground trembled as it crawled toward me. She bared her teeth, her neck adorned with a half-inch-long iron lock. Her face was covered in large and small pus-filled sores, so numerous they obscured her features. A foul-smelling yellow liquid trickled down her cheeks, leaving a trail of pus, blood, and urine wherever she crawled. Urine. The stench was unbearable. No one could have imagined that the person lying on the ground was my beloved younger sister, Xiaowenyu, who had sacrificed her life for love. But even if I dragged her out now and said she was Xiaowenyu, no one would believe me. I narrowed my eyes and kicked her harder. If you're going to be a dog, you better act like one. She was kicked to the ground, her mouth emitting only muffled whimpers, unable to utter a single human sound. Her wide-open mouth was filled with nothing but darkness. Her tongue was long gone. The only person who died that day at the cliff's edge was Lin Xiai. Xiaowenyu's body was replaced with that of a corpse from the mass grave. Torturing an enemy must not be done too quickly. Otherwise, I couldn't ease the hatred in my heart. I would torture her day and night, watching her watch herself fall into the mud, unable to get up, kneeling on the ground and looking up at me. That would be satisfying enough. The crown prince watched me tease Xiaowenyu for a while before laughing softly. He grabbed the chain around Xiaowenyu's neck and pulled her back to his side. He moved all the pastries in front of him to my side. Miss Xia, this isn't what you promised me. My third younger brother's influence in the court has not diminished but grown. And he's been exerting pressure on me at every turn. To help you bring down Gu Cheng, I went to great lengths before the emperor, bribing numerous officials to submit petitions against him. Is this your repayment? I glanced at him out of the corner of my eye, dipped my finger in the tea, and wrote the characters XIENMING on the table. Then smiled. Your Royal Highness need not rush. The best is yet to come. I swear on the lives of the Xie family. All you need to do is wait for Gu Sheng and the third prince to walk into the trap. After being reborn, I abandoned my plan to rely on Gu Sheng for revenge and instead set my sights on the crown prince. Now, the court is in turmoil, and the 6 princes have varying degrees of ability. The third prince is powerful and can stand toe-to-toe with the crown prince in the court. Similarly, only the crown prince can bring down the third prince. The crown prince is the highest-ranking person I can access and the best stepping stone for me. After deciding on my target, I secretly sent the crown prince a token of my loyalty. I used my memories from my previous life to foretell the future for him. I hoped he would help me, and after he ascended the throne, I could serve in the court like the female generals of the previous dynasty. Since being reborn in this life, I have been constantly pondering one question. After avenging my family in this life, what should I do? After avenging my mother's death in my previous life, my heart was filled with nothing but prolonged loneliness and confusion. Avenging my mother had become the meaning of my life. But once the purpose of my existence vanished overnight, I couldn't help but feel lost. Should I simply submit to the fate of a woman in this world? Find a man who loves me, and spend the rest of my life with him? As I pondered, I suddenly recalled my mother's face. Purple and swollen, her eyes wide open in death. My back instantly grew damp, and I broke out in a cold sweat. No! I absolutely refused to follow my mother's path. I spent 2 entire lifetimes struggling to escape the muddy depths. Why should I return to the dark, oppressive confines of the inner courtyard? Why should I be like the other women of this world? To fight tooth and nail over the crumbs of power in a man's hands. To waste my life trapped in love. I, Xia Wanrong, will never allow myself to sink so low. I will hold power in my own hands. After everything I predicted came true, the crown prince immediately dispelled his doubts. He formed an alliance with me, promising to establish a girls' school after he ascended the throne and appoint me as its principal. I smiled sweetly, holding the plate of pastries in my arms, and sat by the window, enjoying the sight of Gu Sheng below, furious with rage. He was furious over the couplet on the door of the tea house, convinced that the tea house was mocking him for being publicly abandoned at his wedding, and was fighting fiercely with the scholar who had written the couplet for the shop. Having suffered such humiliation, given his vengeful nature, he wouldn't even spare innocent bystanders on the street. How could he possibly let the mastermind behind his humiliation off the hook? He must be plotting to take revenge on the Xie family. I'll just wait for him to walk into my trap and eliminate the entire Xie family for me. Sure enough, a few months later, my father received an imperial decree transferring him to a new post. It was the third prince's suggestion to send my father to the harsh and cold Qingzhou province. When I saw my father accept the imperial decree, I knew. The opportunity to avenge my mother had arrived. On the way to Qingzhou, we were ambushed. The servants at home were no match for the well-trained soldiers under the third prince's command. Before long, most of the attendants we had brought to Qingzhou were killed. Only the prince's men, who had stayed behind to protect me, managed to fight their way to the riverbank. Without looking back, I followed my stepfather into the river. The water was churning with hidden currents, and I swam toward my father, clinging tightly to him. Just as he was about to climb ashore, I suddenly pulled a dagger from my calf. The cold blade flashed, and it was already firmly embedded in his throat. My hands trembled uncontrollably from excitement, and I gripped his scalp tightly, pressing his head into the mud, and shouted, "Father, do you remember my mother? If it weren't for your favoritism toward your concubine and your mistreatment of your wife, how could she have died so unjustly?" My mother's swollen, purple face before her death still haunts me. In the dead of night, I can hear her final cries. Every time I close my eyes, her face appears in my mind, constantly reminding me not to forget my enemies. The one who killed my mother was not only my stepmother, but also my hypocritical father who pretended to be virtuous. He was the root of this tragedy. If he hadn't deceived my mother into marrying him for his own selfish reasons, the tragedy of my mother and Xiaowen would never have happened. The most deserving of death in the entire Xia family is him. My father couldn't utter a word as blood gushed up his throat, glistening under the moonlight like embroidery on silk. I smiled softly. "It doesn't matter if you can't remember. You'll be able to see her soon." I reached out and felt around his body. After finding the imperial edict and the token from his previous position, I released my grip on him and let him sink into the water like a dead pig. Soon, his body disappeared with the current, leaving no trace behind. I looked at the jade carving in my hand and smiled. "Good father, only by dying can you help me." Without a moment's hesitation, I quickly put the token away and, under the protection of the crown prince's men, rushed toward the capital. I would use the lives of the entire Xia family to help the crown prince overthrow the third prince and the Gu family. I clung tightly to the horse's back, curling my lips into a smile. "Gu Sheng, just wait and see. This time, I will make you die before my eyes." The grudge between us must be settled with blood. By the time I returned to the capital, half a month had already passed. The third prince exploited my father's death to stir up trouble, accusing the crown prince of being the mastermind behind it all. He rallied the court officials to follow him and pressured the emperor to depose the crown prince. The court was immediately divided into two factions, with tensions running high. However, since the Xia family was now dead and could not speak for themselves, the crown prince gradually lost the upper hand in this matter. As the crown prince's position grew increasingly precarious, I stood before the gates of Kaifeng Prefecture, holding the imperial edict and the token of my appointment. The drums sounded, and I knelt before the gates, holding the imperial edict in my hand, and declared in a loud voice, "I am Xia Wanrong, the sole surviving member of the Xia family. The Xia family was wrongfully killed. I cannot bear to live in shame nor watch the wicked seize power. I beg the emperor to hear my words. Investigate the truth for the Xia family. Restore the truth to the crown prince." On the day of the drumbeat, the emperor personally arrived at the Kaifeng prefecture. The emperor, his three princes, and the crown prince stood on a high platform. The emperor narrowed his eyes, looking at me with suspicion and inquiry. Even after seeing the imperial edict and token I presented, he remained skeptical. I knelt on the ground and bowed several times, speaking firmly. "This humble maiden knows that the token alone cannot convince the emperor of my identity. This humble maiden is willing to submit to the punishment of being beaten with rods, rolled on nails, and nailed to the ground, to prove my resolve. I only beg the emperor to hear my testimony and clear the name of the crown prince." After speaking, I stood up from the ground and removed my outer garments. With unwavering resolve, I rushed toward the nail-studded board. As the nails pierced my body, the agonizing memories of my past life surged back, replaying endlessly in my mind. The pain, akin to being flayed and dismembered, nearly shattered my sanity. Yet I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. One must enter the tiger's den to capture the tiger. If I didn't pay a price, how could the emperor trust me? How could I push the third prince into the spotlight and expose him and his backer? Gu Sheng. To the guillotine? After I rolled off the nail board, covered in wounds, the crown prince immediately walked down with long strides. He covered me with his robe and knelt beside me with a thud, speaking with conviction. Father Emperor, such a loyal and righteous daughter, one in 1,000 years. Please listen to her words. Your son speaks not for himself, but for your eternal reputation as a wise ruler. After a long time, the emperor's voice came. Xia, come forward and tell us everything you saw and heard that day. I dragged my blood-stained body to my feet again. I dug my fingernails into my palms to suppress the excitement and agitation in my heart, and my whole body trembled uncontrollably. I took out the letters Gu Qing had written to me in the past. They were filled with his plans to frame the Xia family and pave the way for the third prince. I pointed out. The Xia family case was orchestrated by Gu Qing, the third prince's behind-the-scenes advisor. These letters are evidence that my younger sister risked her life to smuggle out from Gu Cheng's mansion. This servant also only learned by chance during her escape that her younger sister was still alive. On that day, fearing retribution from Gu Cheng, she faked her death by jumping off a cliff. However, Gu Cheng discovered her and, in a fit of rage, imprisoned her in his mansion to torture her as a means of venting his anger. If you do not believe me, you may search the mansion to verify the truth of my words. The crown prince immediately led his troops to search Gu Sheng's mansion. Within half an hour, they discovered Xia Wanyu, who was on the verge of becoming a pile of rotting flesh. In Gu Sheng's mansion, Xia Wanyu was already on the brink of death. Upon seeing me, her entire body trembled violently, and she opened her mouth wide, unable to stop her agonizing screams. I rushed forward, grabbed Xia Wanyu's hands tightly, and cried out, "My younger sister! I came too late!" Gu Sheng, who was being held captive nearby, turned pale. This is clearly a barbarian slave. How could this be Xia Wanyu? I immediately burst into tears. I would rather die than make a mistake. This is my sister. The crown prince complied and pulled the servant beside Gu Sheng out. The servant had already been replaced by the crown prince's own men. The servant knelt on the ground, trembling, and crawled to Gu Sheng's feet, crying, "Master, it's all my fault. I was just about to take Miss Xia out of the mansion when I was caught and brought back." Gu Sheng opened his mouth to defend himself. But soon, he couldn't say a word. The prince's personal guards had already rushed into Gu Sheng's study and searched the secret compartment, finding numerous letters exchanged between Gu Sheng and the third prince. I covered my face and walked toward Gu Sheng, leaning close to his ear and whispering with a smile, "Mr. Gu, how does it feel to realize that the punching bag you've been venting your anger on day and night is the person you truly care about?" After meeting at the tea house, I handed Xia Wanyu over to the crown prince, instructing him to find a way to change her identity to that of a barbarian slave. I secretly gave Xia Wanyu to Gu Sheng as a birthday present. Gu Sheng did not disappoint me. Xia Wanyu, who had lost her humanity, became the best punching bag for him to vent his anger. Xia Wanyu would neither escape nor resist, and she could take a beating. Most importantly, her voice sounded just like Xia Wanyu, whom Gu Sheng hated the most. This made Gu Sheng utterly obsessed with her. Even if Xia Wanyu were to be reduced to a pile of flesh, he would still keep her in his mansion. This also provided me with a golden opportunity. With Xia Wanyu and me as witnesses, the case against the Xie family was completely overturned. During the investigation, we also uncovered numerous crimes committed by the third prince in the past. Embezzling disaster relief funds, buying official positions to win the hearts of the people, and so on. He even secretly colluded with border tribes, intending to seize power and usurp the throne. And all of this was orchestrated by the same person who had been advising the third prince, none other than Gushing. The emperor was furious. At the court assembly, he threw the third prince's petition for mercy and defense on the ground in front of all the officials. He directly demoted the third prince to commoner status and ordered him to be imprisoned for life in the imperial ancestral temple. As for Gushing, his fate was even more tragic. The entire Gu family was dragged down with him, and all male members over the age of 14 were executed. Those under 14 were exiled to the border regions along with their female relatives to become slaves. His name would be forever etched on the pillar of shame in the Gu family's ancestral hall, to be cursed by future generations. Upon hearing this outcome, I was not the least bit surprised. Similarly, the crown prince was also unfazed, sitting at one end of the carriage. He glanced at me with a faint smile. This outcome is largely thanks to you. Without your help, I wouldn't have been able to bring down the third prince so smoothly. I replied calmly, this is all the retribution they deserve. In the previous life, the third prince wielded immense power in the court, dominating the political landscape. No one could stand against him, and the deeds he committed remained hidden, known only to a few who dared not speak of them. Now, the evil deeds he had committed had become the very tools that would send him to his doom. Truly, good and evil eventually meet their just rewards, and the consequences are profound. After Gu Xing was imprisoned, I went to the prison to see him for the last time. Gu Xing was dressed in rags, his face covered in mud, lying on the ground. His hands were rotting and putrid, like Xiaowen before her death. His entire body emitted an unbearable stench of decay. The emperor was furious over his actions. Before his execution, he would suffer every possible torment. Each day, he would receive 30 lashes and 30 blows to the face with an iron plate, along with various other tortures. None spared. When he saw me, Gu Xing, despite his hands being completely rotted, still tried to grasp my hand to strike me. I smiled slightly and kicked his hand away in disgust. Gu Xing cursed angrily, unwilling to accept his fate. Xiaowanrong, you poisonous woman! I have never done anything to wrong you. I looked down at him with contempt and said slowly, thank you for the compliment. Perhaps you've been in prison too long. Mr. Gu, your memory isn't what it used to be. Since you asked, I'll tell you, as long as you breathe in this world, you are betraying me. Gu Xing's eyes turned blood red, and a murderous aura surged from him. He suddenly accelerated, trying to tackle me to the ground. I lifted my foot slightly and kicked him hard, sending him flying onto the ground, where he lay writhing in agony. I curled my lips into a sneer, looking down at his pitiful state. I couldn't help but clap my hands in delight. I glanced at him with contempt and instructed the guards watching over the prison. His injuries are so severe. If he's not properly cared for, he might not survive until the execution in the fall. Go fetch a bucket of salt water and clean his wounds properly. Remove the rotten flesh so it doesn't soil your execution board next time. Make sure he lives until the day of his beheading. Gu Xing heard this and his eyes widened in shock, forgetting to scream. How dare you? Who dares to follow this poisonous woman's orders? Without an imperial edict, no one can touch me. I turned around, looked at Gu Xing in astonishment, and took a token from my bosom, placing it before his eyes. I smiled and replied, I am the female supervisor personally recommended by His Royal Highness the Crown Prince. Seeing this token is like seeing His Royal Highness himself. Who dares to object? Since the matter involving the Xie family was clarified, I had been granted the title of princess by the emperor and raised in the capital. There was no one else in the capital who could rival the crown prince, who was acting as regent, and his ascension to the throne was imminent. With the actual power in my hands as a princess, I could do more for myself. The first thing I needed to do was request the position of female headmistress from the crown prince to prepare for the female education initiative. The crown prince put down his paper and brush, rubbed his temples, and sighed. He spoke to me seriously. "Xiaowanrong, are you truly determined to take this path? With your current abilities and status, you could simply remain in the capital, enjoy the privileges of a princess, and select a suitable husband to spend the rest of your life with. There is no need to step into the treacherous world of the imperial court." I looked up without hesitation and met the crown prince's gaze. The crown prince and Gusheng, the third prince, were fundamentally the same kind of person in another sense. They were constrained by this world. Although the crown prince praised me highly and was willing to grant me the position of female headmistress, his heart still harbored reservations about me. Perhaps he did not want me, as a woman, to challenge their authority, fearing that one day women might equal men in power. Perhaps he doubted my abilities as a woman, subconsciously believing that I was only fit for the insignificant power within the harem. But I am different from other women. I am Xiaowanrong. In the blink of an eye, I understood the situation before me. I will do it, even if it means breaking my head open. I asked the crown prince, "Your Highness, I am not afraid to walk this path alone. So what are you afraid of?" "I am not afraid of the harshness of the men of this generation, nor am I afraid of rumors. Being a princess or the wife of a marquis is not what I want. Nor is it what you want, Your Highness. You and I both know that only by staying in the court can I continue to serve you and utilize my talents and abilities. Now you are urging me to turn back. Are you afraid that I will grow timid and retreat in the future? Or that you have misjudged me?" The crown prince's gaze grew dark as he looked at me. After a long pause, he spoke. "Even if you end up like the female generals of the previous dynasty, abandoned by all and remembered for your infamy, you will still do it?" I nodded firmly and replied, "As always, I will never look back." At this point, the corners of my lips couldn't help but curve upward. The crown prince remained silent for a long time before removing his waist badge and handing it to me. His gaze unusually gentle. "Then go and do it. I believe in you. With your resolve, perhaps one day, your return will not be met with betrayal and infamy, but rather with glory etched in the annals of history." I clutched the waist badge the prince had removed tightly in my palm, raised my head, and strode confidently toward the door. The path ahead was long and arduous, but the glory of the future lay beyond the horizon.